Okay, I'm sorry if I yelled at you. I'm Dr. Strangle, in case I don't know some of you, or you don't know me. And welcome back. We have today Nick Nelson from KSD, Kansas State Department of Education, who's going to talk to you about the KPPP. That's the big performance assessment that I know you all have already started working on. And you're so excited to do math, I know, for your KPPP. That's a joke online. Last semester, someone emailed me and said, we have to do math. But if you have questions with the KPPP, you are more than welcome to email me, and I can help you with that if you need help. Nick does a really good job. The guidelines are really good, but if you have questions, please just let me know. J.K. Strangle, and I will be glad to help you. So, Nick Nelson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Nelson. I am with the Kansas State Department of Education. My main focus is educator licensing, but I'm also the project manager for the KPPP. So I have a presentation today for you guys. But at any point, if you have questions, just let me know. Raise your hand. As far as finding resources online, if there are some technical difficulties you might be going on, if you just go to our website, which is ksde.org, short for Kansas State Department of Education.org. I'm sorry about our website. It's not the most user-friendly thing in the world. If you just go to the search bar in the top right-hand corner and type in KPPP, it should be the first link that comes up, and there you'll find the content guidelines document, the template where you ultimately sort of create the KPPP, and there's also a few sample portfolios. So if you get stuck on a question, you can see how a few other candidates responded. The purpose today is just to give you a general overview of the KPPP and try to answer maybe some specific questions. But as you're working on the KPPP, and you'll find my contact information on that page as well. And as Dr. Shamel said, you're more than welcome to email me, but a lot of times if you have specific questions about your own KPPP or really just general questions, they really should be going to your faculty, just because they're the ones that really need to be aware if you're struggling, if you're having issues, especially it allows them to keep track if several students are having the same issue, that they can sort of prepare a response for you. I'm more than happy to talk to you, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times the issues really need to be addressed by the faculty. Okay? Yeah. I made this for you guys. It's an apple tree. It's a metaphor. The roots. The foundation. It's going to go on all day. So, there's 6 focus areas. Despite all the language or how overwhelming the KPPP may look, what's important to keep in mind at all times is that what we're asking you to do is to create a unit of study with lesson plans, assessments, and plans for creating a positive learning environment and adaptations for your students. This is what you're trained to do. This is what you'll be doing as teachers every single day of your career. So just always keep that in mind when you're completing it, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed. We're not asking you to do anything that you haven't been trained to do. So there will be sometimes some questions that might confuse you, etc., but always keep that in mind. So you begin by selecting unit of study, your class. If you are elementary self-contained, your class is chosen for you, essentially. 6 or 7 different classes to choose from. My advice is that you choose the largest class that you have. That'll give you more opportunities for adaptation, and it'll also give you sort of a wider view and ultimately disaggregate the data. And we'll talk more about that later. Yes. Within your class, you'll select a subgroup of students. Criteria should be something, the idea is you want to monitor the subgroup's performance in relationship to the rest of the class. This might be something where the criteria have them in a subgroup, and the KPTP will ask you to make specific adaptations for those students' instruction. So that's just the general idea. You'll also select 2 focus students from the class. One of those students should be an English language learner or identified as needing adaptations. Now, if you're elementary and you're with a kindergarten, first grade, the student thinks he's too young to have been officially identified as needing adaptations. So talk with your cooperating teacher, because a lot of times they're already using adaptations even though the student hasn't been officially identified. The focus students can be part of the subgroup. They don't have to be, but they might coincidentally be the most common. Hands start to go up back there. I got it. See? Sorry. What? Both at least one of the 2. The question was, do both of the focus students have to be identified as needing adaptation? The answer is at least one has to be identified as an English language learner or as needing adaptations. But for example, your second focus student could have maybe a serious behavior issue, and you're wanting to make specific adaptations for that student's social or behavior issues, academic. Of course. The question was, does the focus student have to have a deficiency in the content area of teaching? And the answer is no. Yes. Yes. The question was, will gifted count? Of course, it's correct. If you have a subgroup within the class of students that are ahead in the grade level, that could be subgroup testing. So you had your whole class, subgroup, focus. Are you elementary? The content, are you just reading as your content area that you're going to be using for the KPT? Sure. So you don't have to create like a guided reading. Yeah. There's no set number of students that have to be in a subgroup. But again, that's one of the reasons why I recommend that you choose the largest class that you have if you have that option. Because the more students you have in the whole class subgroup group, the more opportunities you have to see if the adaptations you're using are actually working, for example. No, the subgroup does not have to be English language learners or identified as having adaptations. All of this is in the content guidelines. If you look at the content guidelines document, there are steps as far as selecting a subgroup. But again, the idea is that you identify, and the criteria can literally be anything. Students with tennis shoes, but we recommend the criteria obviously is something if you've identified, 6 students in your class that are behind a grade level of reading, that would be your subgroup. They don't have to be identified necessarily as having a learning disability. But if they're behind the grade level and that's the criteria, then you choose that's your subgroup. Yes. Yes. All right. There are very specific formatting guidelines for the KPTP. It's set fonts. It has a 35-page limit. The scorer stops scoring the document at page 35. So even if there's an entire task past page 35, that means that whole task does not get scored. Keep that in mind. Please don't deviate from those specific guidelines. Citrix is an acronym that we'll revisit as we go through the presentation. V is for video recorded. There will be 2 of your lessons that we'll call focus lessons, which will video record. Now, in some districts, video recording students is an extremely sensitive subject. So if you can't get permission to video record students, hopefully you can set it up where you're at least recording yourself, or at the very least recording audio. So just select 2 lessons in your unit that are video recorded. That's what the V stands. We'll talk more about that. It kind of comes more into play in task 2. E is for technology. What we mean by that is not only teacher use to enhance instruction, but student use to enhance learning. So make sure that you're using technology in your classroom for both purposes. R is for reading strategy. So no matter what your content area is, or the content area that you're using for the KBCP, reading strategies are an expectation. I is integration across content fields. And C is community resource. And we do not mean that you have to have a guest speaker. Any resource on the internet is technically a community resource. It can be an app, it can be a website, something from the public library, something from a museum. Any of those things would be community resources. Watering can. The most important thing, develop a timeline for completion. The KBCP is not something that can be done overnight. Please don't pretend to that. If you know your placement now, you can start on task 1. As soon as you know your placement, you can begin pretty much and finish task 1. Get in touch with your cooperating teacher as soon as possible. Start planning out sort of when you're going to be phasing into the teaching portion, start deciding what you'll be teaching exactly, and then you can start doing task 2. So that is the most important thing, developing a timeline for completion. Collaborate, don't plagiarize. So you're all going through the same experience together at the same time. So naturally your first resource should be each other. But don't cross that line into plagiarism where suddenly 2 KBCPs are looking identical. We do catch that, and it does have serious implications not only for you completing the program here at the university, but it also has implications for your licensing. My theory is that candidates make that unfortunate decision once they get desperate, and they panic, and it's because they didn't give themselves enough time to finish the portfolio. So it all goes back to developing that timeline, making sure you're giving yourself plenty of time to complete those tasks. Yeah. The question is, in an elementary setting, is an issue, units, lesson plans, etc., look similar? The answer is no. The last time I toured an elementary school, I think absolutely every single classroom is doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. That is very common nowadays, prescribed curriculum, especially for math and reading. So that's not plagiarism. What you do, and we'll talk more about it in task 1, is you explain the district has a prescribed curriculum for math, reading, whatever the case may be. A lot of times it's provided by a company. You say, the curriculum is provided by whatever company. So that lets the scorer know that what they're looking at is a prescribed curriculum. However, when you get into specific adaptations for your students, and especially in task 3, with reflecting on your individual day-to-day, that should look completely selection is you have to create everything from scratch, the answer is no. The professional expectation is take one of those fields. So don't reinvent the wheel. What we mean is where plagiarism becomes an issue, like I said, is if suddenly task 3, which is where you're actually teaching and reflecting on the adaptations that you made in individual students sort of in your classroom, when those things start to look identical to somebody else's portfolio, that's when it's a problem. Yes. Yeah. But see, this is the thing. For the KBTP, if you're elementary self-contained, this is very important. You select one subject in, one content. You're not reflecting over your whole day. You're not writing the KBTP over your whole day. It's that 50 minutes a day that you're teaching math, if such is the case, or social studies, or reading. Now, if you're in a district that has a prescribed curriculum for math and reading, and you want a little bit more flexibility, maybe you should choose social studies for your KBTP. If that would allow you more flexibility and allow you to be more creative with your unit, then go right ahead. It's something obviously you discuss with your cooperating teacher to kind of find out what's best, what they want you to do. But that's my advice, is that if you are in a district that has that strict prescribed curriculum, where you're essentially reading from a script every day, you might think about not having that as your content area selection for KBTP. You might try arts, social studies, or something. That's just my advice, but it's not required. I feel like, well, that's kind of what they really want me to do. Well, I have these 3 weeks to teach, and during those 3 weeks, it's a reading unit, so that's what we're doing. That's fine. It's not required to provide state testing information, but you'll notice in task 1, it'll ask you to provide some intellectual characteristics for your students, and it'll be in parentheticals, it'll talk about state assessment scores. Those are available to you, and feel free to use those, but you can use just about anything. If your cooperating teacher had a summative assessment for math recently, and you want to use those scores to demonstrate sort of where the students are in that subject area at that time, that's fine.
How many days did an average student?
And that's totally up to you. So it all comes down to the details of your placement. For example, if you're music or PE, I've heard that in some places you're lucky to see the students once a week for 20 minutes. So if that's your situation, then your unit might actually be like 10 weeks, but you're only seeing those students 10 times. Versus if you're single grade self-contained and it's mathematics, you're teaching that 50 minutes a day every single day. So you might not have to have, unit might not be 3 total weeks long, right? Because that's 15 meetings, 55 students. It might instead be 2 weeks long. But it really comes back to the details of the placement. But there's no set have to be this many things. In the content guidelines, you'll find language that refers to both a maximum and a minimum of 8 lesson plans, and I'm sorry that it's confusing, but the answer is it's both. I know. Reason being, because really we have to keep that flexibility in place because of the details of placements like that. If you're on a block schedule, that's an hour and a half that you're going to see those students each day. That's probably enough time for 2 lessons a day versus someone who's going to see them in 10 minutes and they might have. It's going to look so much. Does that make sense? So what I hear you say is that you've got 6 days. Right. You're forcing in the one time? No, you don't have to. No. However it fits your placement, because the unit of study is not defined. It can technically be one lesson, don't do that. But technically it can, right? So you kind of have to look at your placement and look at how often you're going to see that class and kind of make the decision from there. Is this 8 lessons? Is this 12? Is this 6? Where you have to be careful, and inevitably the balance is going to be a foot of snow is going to drop on your school. There's going to be a couple days that are canceled. You're going to have to move things around. You may start with 8 lessons or 12 lessons, but only get 8 because of situations beyond your control. That's why that flexibility is there. Yes, yeah. Well, again, there's not a set number. If you want me to give you a minimum, it's 4. But the reason being, and we'll talk more about it in task 4, but it's possible. The thing is, you have to say, okay, I'm going to see this class of students 4 times during my student teaching experience. That's got to be a unit somehow. Get a little specific, I'm going to have to call it a parking lot question. And then, yeah. Two video recorded lessons. Two. I'm sorry, I lost you. No, I've already done that. You're already done speaking teaching? No, I did. I'm doing multiple times. And one thing that I told you over I started with and then okay, well, like that and it works that I was I'm going to call that a parking lot question. I'm sorry. Okay. What along with the correct response? You're devoting your life to education. Yeah. I suppose. Yes, I was going to. Technically, yes, that's long enough. Again, and it'll make more sense when I go through the tasks to kind of show you those. Just make sure you're paying attention to the content guidelines. If you can because technically, yes, if you're teaching 4 lessons during those 2 periods of block scheduling, that can be a unit of study. Okay, so again, action is the appropriate response, develop at that time after completion. If you know your placement, you can start on task 1 right away. So let's go into task 1. All right. Textual information and learning environment factors. It's the trunk. Now, the KBTP is a technical writing piece. What that means is it will read a lot like stereo instructions. You communicate information, no more, no less. That means you can leave out a lot of I thinks, I feels, I believes. You find yourself pontificating on the philosophy of education style. Okay? Communicate information, answer the questions, no more, no less. If a question can be answered with a bulleted list, then by all means answer it with a bulleted list. Scorers like that. They don't like to hunt through a narrative for evidence. They like to be able to pull it out almost instantaneously as they're reading. So if a question can be answered in such a way, feel comfortable in answering that way. Be specific and be concise. I've read a lot of these documents, and the thing that drives me banana sandwich is vague. I'm the teacher, and it's my job to help the students. Vague. Communicate is really no information. Your audience are current practitioners, retired practitioners, members of higher ed faculty. They know why you're there. They know the teachers do. So don't feel like you have to over-explain. Okay. Another thing that's handy is you can use a list of abbreviations. You can put that in the appendix. So you can refer to things like Learning Objective 1 as L1 or Focus Student A as FSA. So that you don't have to type that out every single time, save space. You don't have to write out multi-tier system of support every time you link ESS. But make sure you provide that key to the abbreviation in the appendix so the scorer doesn't come across something that they're not familiar with, that they can look it up. All right. And task 1, you begin by providing contextual information. You start with the community as a whole. So what does the overall community where you're teaching look like? Things that you might want to consider especially are poverty levels, median income. Those will be sharp indicators for what's going to happen in your classroom. School districts. Blue Ribbon School District, District on Improvement. Do they have a prescribed curriculum for any of the content areas? What kind of testing do they use? Just state assessments? Do they use math testing? What about the specific school? Maybe you're in a school that has a different strategy than the rest of the district for one reason or another. A lot of times an individual school will focus on specific goals given their student population. Okay. And get just more specific, provide contextual information for your whole class, subgroup, and we kind of talked about that a little bit already in your focus. We talked about that. Identifying information should be omitted. So that means no students' names, don't name the district, don't name the city, don't name the school. No students, not yourself, not your collaborating teacher. Don't name Fort Hays State University. That should not appear anywhere in the document. No identifying information of any kind. That being said, don't feel like you have to be overly creative with it. We had a portfolio recently where everything was connected to characters from the Bridge of Terabithia. I thought it was funny because I taught English, but it really confused the score. And so don't feel like you have to be overly creative. Just keep it simple. District A, student B, things like that. Use your resources to track down information. So again, as soon as you know your placement, you're in contact with your cooperating teacher. If you find out that, hey, you're getting in the secondary English position and you've got 25 kids in the class and 23 of them are on IEPs, the first stop should be to the special education teacher, the paraprofessionals, school counselors, school psychologists. Just be aware that these professionals exist in your building or in your district. And hit them up for information, for ideas, for adaptations that work. Chances are, remember, that they've had a relationship with the student since pre-K, right? So they might know what really works for that student, what doesn't work so much for them. So track down that information. Yes. Yeah. The question was, do they have to mention the information to track them? Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about that. In task 4, there's a communication log, but you're not expected to log every single communication you have. Essentially, you select, I think it's like 5, and it's the communications that you identify as having a positive impact in your classroom. So, for example, if you started out by having a conversation with a special education teacher, they gave you some great strategies for your focus students, and they worked really well, that'd be a great communication. All right. Questions for you on a task 2? All right, task 2 is designing instruction. First things first, know your resources. So this is where you're actually designing that nice, pretty unit of study. Make sure that you'll have available the resources you need to teach that unit. I spent a summer once designing a unit for Whom the Bell Tolls, only to get to school the first in-service day to find 2 books in the bookroom. Didn't do me a lot of good at the class 25. Technically, yes, it was in the book, but so things like that. You might not have to worry about that these days. You get new iPads, but back then it's an issue. So make sure that you put eyes on the resources, sort them if you can, put them in a corner. Okay. Now, so again, you're selecting your grade level, your content, topic, and rationale. So this would be something like 3rd grade, social studies, goods and services. Your rationale can be a number of different things. If you're on a prescribed curriculum, then it would be this is literally what's next in the prescribed curriculum. But if you have a little bit more flexibility, you want to make sure that you have a decent rationale as to why, maybe you chose that unit because it just works really nicely with what you're studying in math. And you can do a lot of integration across content fields. That's a great rationale. Yeah. So, I assume whatever those names are. The question was basically what is the content? So that's your content area, math, English, science, social studies, biology, etc. I heard somebody. Yeah. Well, and you'll have so 3rd grade is your grade level, social studies is your content, your topic is goods and services, and then you're going to have probably state standards relevant to that topic. Those are your standards. Okay. Learning objectives. Make sure they are measurable. Students will love to read. It's admirable, but not measurable. Make sure that they can be measured. Make sure that they're tied to specific state standards. So for math and reading, we're going to hope to see the Common Core standards. There are new science standards that we would hope to see, and there are new social studies standards that we would hope to see as well. But it comes back to using whatever your cooperating teacher is using. So if they're still using the older standards, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, sure. That's fine. question is it okay to use the older standards if your school is still using the standards? The answer is yes. Yes. The question is, are you using the standards for the state in which you're teaching? The answer is yes. So if you're not teaching in Kansas, obviously it's difficult to use the Kansas standards, so use whatever standards the state. No, because you have to actually list them. You'll list them in past due. Yes, we're going to dock it. 0. Just chuck it out the window. Yeah. I'm unfamiliar with the early learning guidelines. Whatever standards, state standards that exist for early childhood, that assessments. Make sure you include pre-assessment, formal formative, informal formative, summative. Pre-assessment is very important. You need to do as much as you can to make sure that data is reliable. So if you have the type of class that shuts down the mention of the word test, then you might try to sneak it in sort of placebo-wise, like they don't know that you're taking a pre-assessment. Because ultimately you compare the results of that pre-assessment to your summative, so it's difficult if your pre-assessment data is not reliable, but then depend on it for that comparison with the summative. Okay. We talked about metric. Make sure that you're adapting those lessons for your focus students, if need be. Keyword is variety. Okay? I read a lot of these, and what puts me to sleep fastest is lesson, quiz, test. Textbook, quiz, test. Lecture, test. Okay. Can those pass? Yes. Did it put us to sleep? Yes. Try to change it up. Variety of activities, student-centered, teacher-centered, cooperative learning. Use those things that you learn. Yeah. Formal. Sure. Yes, that's fine. But don't feel like that's all you have to include. If you want to include your own summative assessment as well, that's fine. If the data you collect is from that traditional summative assessment, that's fine. But let's say you also wanted to have a project for their summative assessment as well, that's okay too. No. Yes. They don't have to be. But the key is remember that they both need to measure all of the learning objectives. So make sure they match. They don't have to be the exact same thing, but they need to match. Okay. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Andrews, I need to talk about that 4 or 5 and get everything together. So I'm trying to think of things that will apply to so many of you. It's great to see standards listed, but essentially if there's really no formula for how small or how great time frame will be, make sure that you're reaching your students that you know need the time to grow. So your gain scores obviously will show that weakest student in your class benefited from the fact that you sat down really hard. And you look at what will be my objectives, how can I get those 2 students in my subgroup to grow. Specifically, I'm just going to take a second. This does not mean you take your ensemble as your random group. That's a mighty large group to take. If you do, and use it close, don't forget that if they have difficulty matching kids or keeping a beat, that might be your special student or 2 in a group. But more often than not, I realize most of you try to take a class where you easily can have something measurable that can be recorded and can be documented and recorded for the data. And so a lot of you
you like to objectives for your scoring this, that we know that you made something realistic that every student in your class who has a sample can get there, and that way you'll see this. Am I making sense what I'm saying? Okay. So I think the objectives are really important. Your assessment are tied to that more than they are the standards.
Any questions over time? Yep. The question is, does the test have to do with the test? The summative test is a pre-assessment. Sure. The question is essentially about the matching of pre-assessment. The most important thing is that they measure all of your learning objectives, pre-assessment, summative. It doesn't have to be multiple choice, true, false. It doesn't have to. But just make sure that they match. If the idea is you have to, when you disaggregate your data, you're going to want to see improvement for the class from pre-assessment to summative. So if those two assessments don't match, then your data is not reliable, and you can't really tell if they made progress. Yes, okay. So those two focus lessons we talked about that are video recorded, those are put in their entirety in the appendix. Not in the actual document, but in the appendix. Right? Whatever. The two focus lessons that you choose, the ones that are video recorded, those lesson plans go in their entirety in the appendix. Okay. Whatever format you use, and most of the time each university has its own. This is a 4A state university template for writing a lesson. So what you'll find in task 2 is that it asks for general outlines of lessons. Okay, you don't have to put. It makes sense. You're not putting all 8 of your lesson plans in their entirety in the KPT. They're general outlines of task 2, and then those 2 focus lessons that you select, those are put in the entirety in the appendix, which does not count toward the 35 pages. Reason being is because you're going to answer more specific questions about those 2 lesson plans, and it helps the scorers be able to see those in their entirety. So for the rest of the lesson plan, just that general outline will do. And if you go and look at the template is online, ASCE.org. If you look at the template in the content guidelines, you'll see under task 2, the sort of questions that you have to answer about your lesson plan, they're basically just asking for a general outline. Okay. It's a strange concept to me that a cooperating teacher would not use a pre-assessment. Yes, we try to introduce that to the classroom. Any more questions about that? All right, that's the teaching learning. Now, at this point, tasks 1 and 2 should be done completely. All right, because task 3 is now you are teaching this unit. All right, those 2 tasks, task 1 and 2 should be done. Now, you have this nice, pretty plan from task 2. Mike Tyson once said everybody has a plan until they get hit. But now you actually teach the unit. This is where everything goes wrong. Okay. Alright. Fourth thing. Don't recreate tasks. You've already communicated to the scorer what lessons you're teaching that day. If they need to refer back to task 2, they can. The goal of task 3 is the performance and then reflection. Okay? So specifically, there's a daily teaching reflection guide. The information information that you include in those reflections basically boils down to, all right, how'd the whole class do? How'd the subgroup do? How'd your focus do? How do you know that? Based on your assessment. So for that particular lesson, you just did a informal, formative assessment. That's your thumbs up, thumbs down, everybody got it or not got it, right? So what happens when half your class is thumbs up and half your class is thumbs down? The last thing you should do, and the last thing the scorer wants to see you do, is to proceed with the rest of the lesson as nothing happens. All right? So the point of that reflective piece is that if half your class is thumbs down, you do something about it. And you say something like, well, since half the students indicated that they're not on the same page with everybody else, I set them apart in a group, and I had, the other half kind of continue on, and I worked specifically with that group until everybody was on the same page, and I brought us all back together. That's the kind of thing. The point is that you're remembering to use the assessments you had planned, and also mentioning the adaptation of those focus to those lessons. So just mention, you had this adaptation in place for the focus students. Was it successful? Was it not successful? If it wasn't successful, what are you going to do differently the next day? The important thing to remember, the way that we train scorers, they are not, absolutely not, judging your practice. If it doesn't go well, that's how sometimes it does. And when you're a student teacher, it's not going to go. The lesson will fall flat, the adaptation will make student behavior worse. They feel like a hurricane. But the important thing is you adjust. That you don't just try to think through the same strategies or the same things that didn't work. You try something else. Okay? So, one day I had 50 minutes of instruction time. Everybody down, kind of had the bell work done, and there was a fire drill. Unscheduled. Somebody pulled it. Get up, outside, do the thing, everybody comes back in, 25 minutes left, just about to get started again, student vomited on the bus. That was the other 25 minutes. That was a whole day of instruction. That's all that happened. Absolutely no instruction really took place. What's going to happen? Something like that or something similar like that is going to happen. Or like I said, a foot of snow is going to get dumped on your town, and school's going to be closed for you. You're going to lose that instruction. So the important thing is that first you reflect on that, like this was the situation, this is exactly what happened, and what scorers want to see is what you did about it. You still have to give that instruction. So what did you move around? What did you take away? What did you put in place? That's that reflective practice. That's mastery. Okay? Disaggregated data. Now, there is a specific place in the document where you place your disaggregated data. And they are the chart or a table. I recommend a bar or a line graph. Don't use a pie chart. Those are weird. But the whole point when you're disaggregating your data is that at a glance, you, the scorers, should be able to see student performance, measured all of those learning objectives, comparing the pre-assessment with the summative assessment, disaggregated your whole class, your subgroup, focus student A, and focus student B. So at a glance, they can see the performance compared in those different areas, or those different groups of students. Questions about that? Okay, fast forward. So it's important, again, I revisit why having a reliable pre-assessment and having a matching summative assessment is so important, and disaggregating the data is so important. So the first thing you do in task 4 is identify the 2 learning objectives that were most successful and the 2 that were least successful. And the way you do that is according to the data that you disaggregate. You give some reasoning behind why you think those 2 learning objectives were the most successful and why the 2 others were least successful. some rationalization and talk a little bit about professional learning opportunities that might help you enhance successful learning objectives or support those not successful learning objectives. Now, in task 4 is where you'll find the communications log. But the communications log is something that you can sort of work on the entire time. We'll talk a little bit about it. The idea is, and it's set out where you identify specific communications with a student, a parent, another professional, a faculty member, etc. You identify a communication that ended up having a positive impact in the classroom. So the example that I gave again is you interviewed a special education teacher about a specific student. They gave you some ideas from that person adaptation. You used those. They were successful. That being a great communication. I think there's a total of 5 that you include. So it's not having to log every single communication that you have. But the idea is that at the end, you're sort of looking back. You're saying it's a really good thing to have that conversation with a special education teacher. That really ended up helping. Yes. Sure. There might be, and it could be something like, I think some of the most successful moments I had in the classroom was when I called home to let a parent know that their child was actually doing really well, and then that encouraged them even more. That'd be yeah. Focuses. Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're involved. Now, task 4 is historically the lowest scoring task. There's a couple theories. Number 1, at the end of the document, so if you go over the page limit, this is the task that's going to be a second. Push over the page limit. So don't forget, 35 pages total. In the template, there are little guidelines. We'll talk about how the response is limited to 2 pages. That's not a hard limitation. Those are there to let you know that if it says limited to 1 page and you go 2 pages, that you know you have to shorten up in other places so that ultimately you don't go over the 35 page limit. Okay? The second theory is your entirety is one of the least. That's okay. Oh, yeah. Can't even hear you. I'm sorry. Technically, yes, and you can mention it if you're reflecting. If you had a strategy in place, but you didn't specifically use it while you were teaching math, you can still mention it. You can say that, earlier in the morning, FSA was doing this behavior. I used this strategy, and it made the behavior better. That's okay. Make sure that you review the complete document. If page 32 is blank, it's scored. And if there's a blank page 32, that probably means there's a page 36 that will not be scored. So before you hand it in, make sure there's no serious formatting issues and no blank pages, things like that. Final question. No. 35 pages is the maximum. And it's hard to, it's not a deficit model. If you look at the rubrics, which are on the content guidelines, the way it's scored is, 1, 2, 3, criteria not met, criteria partially met, criteria met. So there's no exemplary. As long as you meet that criteria according to the rubric, you really should be in that 3 range. So it's not a deficit model. So if you don't have a communication with the parents, you've had the opportunity, or they were all really negative and it really didn't belong to the communication block, the scorer is not going to see that and go, oh, that's an automatic one. Not a deficit ball. And they're sort of, they score each task holistically. If you look at the rubric, hopefully that'll make more sense. That'll be TK20 is where you ultimately submit it. And then ultimately your university uploads it to a document warehouse with the state agency, and then I send them out to scores. You can expect to have scores back in about 4 weeks. For an institution this size, you'll have to expect kind of that longer side, so it might be about 4 weeks. Possible score of 30. Passing score is 20. If you do not meet the cut score, your institution has a remediation process in place. So it's kind of an issue with them. Third, if you don't call me when you don't pass, if you don't pass.
Last semester, the first time we really did a trial run. Last semester was the first time we really did a trial run on this. And to give you some peace of mind, all sounds real complicated, you worry about this, but our candidates really did a great job.
Out of 102, there were 5 that didn't meet the cut. And I think 3
That makes you feel a little better going home? I'm done.
So again, 5 didn't meet the cut score, and I think 3 of the 5 was a 19.5 out of 20. So very remediation. But again, it does come down to, because I have seen the difference between a 19.5 and a 20 come down to that blank page 32. So that's why, again, developing that time after completion and reviewing that document are so important. Yeah. Yes. Anything. Okay. Don't mess with the formatting of the actual template. The appendix doesn't count towards the 35 pages, and when you read through the content guidelines, there are specific things that go into that appendix, and it'll tell you what's supposed to go in there. You can put other things in the appendix if you want to. Like I said, that list of abbreviations, that's something you can put in the appendix that's helpful. But don't try not to overload the appendix, because that can have an issue when I'm trying to, because all the portfolios are sent out via email to scorers. Sometimes it can be an issue if your document is really large. So, sure, it's still debatable. It's fine. Yeah. They've done some work on the website recently. I'll go check it out, and if there is an issue, I'll try to get it resolved. Yeah. Sure. I'll check it out. I'll see if there's an issue overall with the website. Yeah. Yeah. Because the scorers know what's in the appendix, what should be. Oh, sorry. What's the question? The question is if you have to indicate to the scorer when to look at the appendix, and the answer is no. They can look at the appendix, they know what should be. Okay. Real quick thing, and then I'll leave you alone. So educator licensing is the other 4/3 of what I do in the State Department. In the math, right? Math people. Okay. Sorry. Emergency substitute license might be something you want to look at. When I was student teaching, I actually got to step in. My cooperative teacher went out on leave the last 3 weeks of the experience, and I got to stay on as a sub. It was awesome to then have DP on in that week. So if you want to apply for an emergency substitute license, our website asde.org, and and under teaching and learning, the link to license applications. The reason I mention it, and the cost is fairly substantial, $60 for the application and a separate $50 for the fingerprint background check. But the reason I mention it is because if your principal comes to you with this sort of situation and says, we need you to start tomorrow, you will not have your license by the next day. Our standard processing time in our office for any application received is 4 to 6 weeks. And we work applications in the order received. And I tell you this to keep in mind for the rest of your career. Once you have your actual standard teaching license, frame it, put it someplace where you're looking at it every single day. Because it's the reason you get a paycheck. Teachers lose their jobs over letting their licenses expire. It's a breach of contract. Sometimes they'll put you on self-pay. Sometimes they'll outright terminate you. It's a very silly reason to lose your job. So make sure that you're maintaining your license, but also know that licensing consultants like myself exist, so that if you have a question about your license, make sure that you're contacting us, but you're not asking the teacher next door or your principal, etc. Always contact us when you have questions about your license. Okay? Yeah, that's right. I'm just saying after your experience is done, if they wanted you to stay on or stuff. Yeah. That'd be a question for the institution, I think. The only times you include lesson plans in their entirety are those 2 focus lessons you put in the appendix. The rest of them you just outline in task 2. So the answer is no. You don't want to include them in their entirety in the actual document, because then it's going to be way more than 35 pages. Okay. Any other questions before I get back on?
Nick will be here again February 6th.
We'll probably bring tomatoes or bottles back on.
Whatever turns you on. So you'll be here for 2 hours on February the 6th. That's the same day as the mock interviews. So make those appointments for the mock interviews in the morning, and take advantage of his knowledge of KPTP in the afternoon. And really, you should be working on it by then. Okay? Thanks so much. Appreciate it.